Hey everybody, I'm Aaron Simmons, and this is the September bonus video as part of my monthly newsletter. Again, if you are not subscribed and so you're watching this in October or November when I make it public, please go get subscribed at my website, jaaronsimmons.com. And if you are already subscribed and so you're watching this in September when it's first released exclusively to you, thank you so much for being part of this community. Thanks for plugging in with me, for thinking about things that matter and talking about them and reflecting on them in this longer form that I can do on these videos in comparison to the stuff on my normal YouTube channel. So, super excited. My book, Camping with Kierkegaard, Faithfulness as a Way of Life, just dropped today. And I am super excited. I can't wait to share it with you. I hope that you will check it out. If you've already bought a copy, thank you. If you have not bought a copy, please do. And here's why. I have written lots of books, and none of them would I recommend to the broad public. None of them would I just say to whoever you are, hey, get this one. But when it comes to Camping with Kierkegaard, that's what I'm saying. All my other books are academic. They're all super devoted to very technical debates. They're written by a scholar to scholars. This book is different. This one is a personal engagement with existential philosophy, which I've studied for now more than 20 years. And I'm doing this while riding mountain bikes, trout fishing, backpacking, camping, overlanding. I love being in the mountains. And so it's my attempt to try to put into practice the ideas that arise from this existential mode of doing philosophy and putting it into practice on the trails, in our lives, in the office, while navigating the world, whatever that looks like. It is not a book that expects you to love camping. It's not a book that expects you not to be bothered by mosquito repellent. It is instead a book that invites you to figure out what is worthy of your finitude wherever you are. I navigate that in the mountains. You might navigate it with a really good book, Camping with Kierkegaard, while drinking a really good cup of tea. It might be the case that you want to sit on the beach. It might be that you simply want to watch a good movie. Whatever it is that brings you joy, that's the stuff I'm trying to highlight and celebrate and then think through proposively relative to existential thought. So grab a copy. I think you're going to enjoy it. Help me spread the word. Share it with your friends. Buy them copies. Post on social media. Really help me get the word out about this book. I'm excited to offer it to you, and I'm really stoked about what I think you're going to find in it. Well, in this video, in light of the book, this whole issue has been devoted to ideas and themes that the book develops. And so I thought it might be kind of fun to do something I don't actually do in the book, but maybe gives a little bit of a background context, a little bit of philosophical backdrop or framework internal to which the book kind of unfolds. And that is to talk about existentialism or existential philosophy and to give you a little bit of a frame of what that means, how it functions. In the book, I'm kind of just letting it be this background. And so I thought maybe I'd give you a little bit more of a technical account of what's going on so that the book might be able to resound for you at a different level. So existentialism, existential philosophy has basically two different ways of making sense of it. The first is a historical notion. So existentialism as a very particular movement that plays out in the 19th and 20th centuries. This is primarily associated with people like Friedrich Nietzsche, Soren Kierkegaard, Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, Simone de Beauvoir, and many others. Primarily a German and French movement in this historical sense, although, of course, we've got Kierkegaard from Denmark. Dostoevsky, of course, is writing more in the Russian context. So it's a generally, kind of European movement that emerges in response to what we might understand as the kind of high modernism that one finds in someone like Hegel. Now, the other way, we'll come back to that, but the other way of making sense of existentialism is what I sometimes refer to as existential philosophy. And so it's trying to get away from an ism or a historical, concrete, rigid designator and try to open it up and think about philosophy done in an existential mode. And this is something that can extend back to certain passages in Plato. The unexamined life is not worth living, a call to reflection. We find moments like this in Hamlet, where Shakespeare has Hamlet say, to be or not to be, that is the question. This is something that we can find in music, in the blues, it can happen in films. Existential philosophy is not limited to a technical set of texts associated with a particular, self-named movement. It's instead a way of doing thinking, and it's a way of doing thinking that is oriented toward intentionally living, purposively engaging with the questions of our existence, usually framed by the reality of our vulnerability and the reality of our relationality. Those are the two hallmarks of existential philosophy. I developed those in the book. Now, why are those two things so important? Because relationality names the fact that we are never in the world alone, that we are social creatures, that we are relational at our core. What it is to be a self in this general existential approach is to realize that we are morally entangled with others. And this leads then to political entanglements with others, depending on the contingent social frameworks that we have allowed to be true for our communities, for our cities, for our business lives. Now, we are entangled and we are social in some ways precisely as a result of or nested in our vulnerability. We are finite. We are not going to live forever. Our bodies break, right? So if we are vulnerable, this means that we need to be maximally aware of the significance of our decisions about how to live, because we don't have an infinite amount of time in which to live. We don't get to keep trying and get it right eventually because we've got as long as we want. We've got to kind of, admit the risk and strap our boots on and keep on moving in order to live in light of this limit that fundamentally names the kinds of beings that we are. Martin Heidegger will call this our being toward death. Soren Kierkegaard will talk about anxiety as the sort of mode in which we live as a result of our finitude. And this is something that then shapes and frames the significance of the question, how then will I live? When Hamlet says to be or not to be, he's wrestling with the fact that our vulnerability conditions and signals the meaningfulness of every instant. Will we decide to get out of bed and keep walking, or will we decide to roll over and say, I'm done? That is really a question for us. Albert Camus comes back and asks the same question when he says there's only one real issue in philosophy, whether or not to commit suicide. Now, as horrible as that is when framed that way, he's right. Are we going to get up and move, or are we going to refuse to inherit the task of existing? That question, will we live well? Will we live accidentally? These are the questions that define our existence, and existential philosophy, in whatever mode, in whatever medium, is confronting us with that necessity of choosing to live on purpose. Now, that approach is what I develop in the book. That's the kind of stuff I draw on. So I'm drawing on people like Kendrick Lamar, on folk singers like Donovan Woods. I'm, of course, drawing heavily on Kierkegaard and Jean-Paul Sartre. I'm also, though, drawing on a range of thinkers like Wendy Farley, a contemporary feminist theologian, and Martin Luther King, right? The way in which I try to create this cloud of witnesses thinking together about how to live on purpose is something that requires existential philosophy to expand beyond any historical limit or historical bounded set. Now, when we talk about existentialism as a movement, the ism part of existentialism, this is something that is narrower, it's more circumscribed. The best way to understand existentialism, I believe, is to reflect on a phrase by Jean-Paul Sartre, where he says that the definition, the core of what existentialism is all about is that existence precedes essence. That phrase, existence precedes essence, is, I will suggest, basically the nugget around which all other existentialist philosophers, in a technical sense, kind of orbit. They all are engaging that in some way. Now, there's two ways to understand it. And Sartre admits this. He says there's a theistic way and an atheistic way to approach this. Another way to put it is we can approach existence preceding essence as, I would suggest, a kind of metaphysical point or an epistemic point. If we approach it metaphysically, this is the claim that who we are is non-defined from the outset. There is no thing that it is to be us. There is no directedness that ought to be how we navigate the world. There is no prior idea of what it looks like to do human existence well. So this metaphysical idea, in other words, it's rejecting any realism about human identity as preceding the contingent facts of our actual existence historically in the world. This is what Sartre will call atheistic existentialism, because he's saying there is no God to have an idea about what it is to be human, right? There is no creator. There is just us popping up in the world and having to figure out what it is that we're going to be and how it is we're going to live and what is going to be important. The epistemic alternative, or what Sartre calls theistic, is the idea not so much that we're making a metaphysical claim about what is or is not the case about us ontologically, right? It's not that we're saying there is no God and there is no thing that it is to be us. It's instead an epistemic point about the fact that whatever is the case, metaphysically, we are confronted with the sheer brute facticity of our existence, and we've got to figure out what then we will believe. Who will we let ourselves be? For what will we hope? And these questions, it's not that then one would appeal to God to just instruct one in these ways, but it's even if one were to say, well, I will navigate and direct my life religiously oriented towards something like God, that is a contingent existence about how we understand the concept of God as articulated within these historical spaces in the first place. So it's all existentialist because it admits of the relationality and the finitude that define our existence. And then it says, so we've got to start with the fact of being here, somewhere, in a context, in a place, with a history. And then we've got to decide, what will this mean? And I would suggest that whether theistic, atheistic, whether epistemic or metaphysical, these are options that confront us in the same way. Here we are, so where are we going? Are we going to define our existence in terms of some sort of transcendent idea? Well, then we decide that that is in fact the way we will direct our lives. We might be wrong. The risk continues. Will we define our existence in terms of the absence of any kind of transcendent standard or model? Then that's the way we go, and the risk continues. So in neither of these approaches does the risk get avoided. In neither of these approaches do we get some sort of guarantee that we've got it all figured out. And in both of these approaches, existentialism is defined by this affirmation of our socially contingent existence as the context in which we make meaning, whatever that then means to us. Now, rather than think about this as some sort of depressing, miserable, awful thing, which unfortunately existentialism sometimes can seem that way. I, in fact, had a t-shirt made a bunch of years ago that just said existentialism, not just for goth kids. And again, I got nothing against goth kids, but the whole idea was trying to get away from existentialism as what you read when you're really angsty, in your early teenage years. Existentialism is, I would suggest, best understood whether, again, as this existential philosophy or a rigorously historical movement. Either way, it is an approach to thinking that is devoted to thinking well about living. Existentialism is concerned with who we are, where we're going, and why it matters. And I think that that's really cool. So in the book, in Camping with Kierkegaard, I lean again into the existential idea rather than the existentialist idea. But the whole book is about inviting me to think really deeply about what matters. What is the direction of our risk? What is, as I say in the book, worthy of our finitude? What will we decide is worthwhile? And that's a question that I think philosophy can help us navigate. It's not going to tell us where to go, because again, the philosophers disagree about the direction worthy of our risk, worthy of our finitude. But they will suggest that we've got to own this. We've got to step up into this. We've got to take seriously this task as a task for a lifetime. And that's why I think they encourage us to take seriously faithfulness as a way of life. Faithfulness in this sense is not a religious concept. It's the idea that we are risking with direction, that we are oriented toward not checking boxes and being done with stuff and giving our life meaning because we've got a big bank account or a fancy car or a bunch of degrees. Faithfulness is about living on purpose, owning the risk involved, and continuing to step forward into who we hope to become. Are we faithful to what matters? And in that sense, Sartre is right when he says he's trying to live faithfully into what atheism would expect of him, what it would mean to live in light of the death of God. Kierkegaard said he's trying to live faithfully into what it means to become a Christian, to live in light of the task of neighbor love, of trying to undertake what that involves as a lived reality. Both of them are committed to faithfulness. The orientation of their risk is a little bit different because their direction is different. I'm not here to decide which is the better one. The book, again, tells you about the way I tend to direct myself, the way I've kind of moved forward. It involves a lot of mountain biking and trout fishing. The question is, which way will you decide is worth your finitude? And I would suggest that existentialism, existential philosophy, are profound resources for helping us understand that whatever we take to be true about ourselves, our essence, if we have one, if we don't, the only space where that question confronts us, where we take it up, where we navigate it, is our actual historical, embodied, social, vulnerable existence. We exist and figure out what it means to be here. I think that's actually a pretty compelling task. And I think it's one that will always accompany wherever we go in life, rather than being one we figure out and move beyond. That's why Kierkegaard says faith is a task for a lifetime. I think he's right. Okay, well, I hope this is helpful thinking about existentialism, giving a little bit more of a backdrop, a little bit of a frame of the big issues, some of the main players. And please go pick up Camping with Kierkegaard if you haven't already. And maybe this video will give you a little bit better context for some of the ideas that I developed therein, though it is certainly not necessary. Again, this is a book written to everybody, and I hope you really do find it to be worth your time. So thanks again for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for being part of this philosophical community that we're making together. I'll see you next time on our bonus video for the October newsletter on October 1st, unless a piano falls on our heads. Take care.